My name is Emma. I'm 29 and I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized litigation firm in Sacramento, California, which means I spend most of my working life making sure documents, deadlines, and financial filings are accurate down to the last decimal. Because in my job, a single wrong figure can cost a client an entire case. Accused by my own older brother of never contributing a dollar toward our younger sister's college tuition, I stood in a crowded auditorium lobby 3 months ago during her graduation reception, listening to him tell nearly the entire extended family a version of the last 4 years that simply wasn't true, right up until a financial aid officer from the university, there to personally congratulate a handful of students in a scholarship program, mentioned my name to the room without anyone having asked her to. I'm the one who kept her in school, my brother Anthony had said, raising a plastic cup of sparkling cider like he was giving a toast. Marcus didn't put in a cent toward any of this. I carried it. If you're watching this, comment where you're from and what time it is right now for you and hit subscribe because you need to see how this unfolds. Let me take you back to where this actually started. Our mother, Isabel Delgado, raised the three of us alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Stockton after our father left when I was 9, working double shifts as a hospital dietary aide for most of my childhood, a job that paid steadily but never generously. Anthony, 5 years older than me, had always positioned himself as the family's protector in our father's absence, the one who walked our younger sister, Camila, to school, the one who intervened when neighborhood kids gave her trouble, a role he took seriously and mostly deserved credit for. Growing up, money in our house operated on a kind of unspoken triage system, our mother deciding week to week which bill absolutely couldn't wait and which could survive another few days of late fees. Anthony, being oldest, absorbed a lot of that pressure directly, taking a part-time job at 16, mostly to make sure there was gas money for our mother's car so she could get to her hospital shifts on time. I absorbed it differently, quieter, learning early that I felt calmer when I could see numbers laid out clearly rather than carried around as a vague, looming worry, which is probably part of why I ended up drawn to paralegal work in the first place, a job built almost entirely around precision and paper trails. When Camila got accepted to a 4-year university 2 hours from home 4 years ago, the family celebrated, but the celebration came with an obvious, unspoken problem. Our mother's income couldn't cover the gap between Camila's financial aid package and the actual cost of attendance, roughly $9,200 a year after grants and a partial scholarship. Anthony, in front of the whole family at Camila's high school graduation party, announced that he'd handle whatever the loans don't cover, a generous, public commitment that everyone, myself included, admired him for making. What Anthony didn't know, because I never told him, was that I'd already spoken privately with our mother a week earlier and agreed to split the gap with him evenly, quietly, without turning it into an announcement at a party. I didn't correct him in front of everyone that day, partly because I didn't want to undercut a genuinely generous moment for him, and partly because I assumed the actual payment records, split evenly between us every semester, would simply exist as an accurate account regardless of what got said out loud at a graduation party. Over the following 4 years, I set up an automatic transfer of $575 a month directly to the university student accounts portal, timed to arrive before each semester's payment deadline, a habit I maintained without interruption for 48 consecutive months. I never mentioned it in the family group chat, mostly because Anthony had established himself early as the one publicly narrating the financial side of Camila's education, checking in with her about balances, texting her reminders about scholarship renewal deadlines, work that was genuinely useful and that I never tried to take credit for myself. Anthony's own contributions, I'd later piece together, were real, but considerably less consistent than mine. Larger occasional payments made whenever a balance notice stressed him out enough to act, sometimes covering a full semester at once, sometimes falling short and quietly covered by financial aid adjustments, or, as it turned out, by my own automatic transfer filling whatever gap remained. He was never dishonest about making payments. He simply, over 4 years of being the one who talked about the tuition situation at every family dinner, started to believe his own narration was the complete picture. The specific claim that crystallized into confrontation happened at Camila's graduation reception 3 months ago. held in the lobby of the university's Performing Arts Center, where Anthony, riding the emotional high of watching our little sister cross the stage, raised a cup of sparkling cider and told the gathered aunts, uncles, and family friends, I'm the one who kept her in school. Marcus didn't put in a cent toward any of this. I carried it, and I'm proud of that. I felt the familiar pull to just let it go. The way I had for 4 years of quietly letting Anthony be the visible face of Camila's financial support. But before I could decide whether to say anything, a university financial aid officer named Ms. Whitcomb, who oversaw a first-generation scholarship cohort Camila had been part of, approached our small group to personally congratulate her, a gesture the office made for a handful of students each year. Camila, congratulations. We're so proud of how you managed everything on your end these past 4 years, Ms. Whitcomb said warmly, and then, almost as an aside, while reviewing a small folder of scholarship completion paperwork she was returning to our mother, added, and I have to say, it's rare to see a family account this consistent. 48 straight months of on-time payments from Marcus Delgado's account kept your sister's balance at zero every single semester, which is honestly part of why she qualified for the renewal scholarship each year without a gap in eligibility. The lobby went quiet in that particular way. A celebration goes quiet when an offhand professional comment lands directly on top of a toast someone just gave. Anthony's cup lowered slightly, his expression shifting from proud to visibly confused. That can't be the full picture, Anthony said, his voice tightening. I've been paying on this the whole time, too. You have, I said, calm, my voice even, genuinely not wanting to turn my little sister's graduation into a public argument. I never said you didn't. I just also set up an automatic transfer 4 years ago and never mentioned it because I didn't think it needed to compete with what you were already telling everyone. Camila, standing between us in her cap and gown, looked between her 2 older brothers with an expression I hadn't expected, somewhere between amused and exasperated. You both paid, she said. I've known that this whole time. I just didn't realize neither of you knew the other was doing it. Our mother, standing nearby, spoke up gently. Marcus told me about the automatic transfer the week after your graduation party. Anthony, she said. I assumed you two had talked about it since. Anthony's composure cracked slightly then, genuine embarrassment crossing his face before he set his cup down on a nearby table. I don't think we ever actually talked about it directly, he admitted. I think I just kept assuming, every semester, that whatever I said was the thing keeping her enrolled, because that's the story I'd already started telling. I want to go back and describe what those 48 months actually looked like, because I compressed them into a sentence about automatic transfers, and I think the texture matters. I set the transfer up during my 2nd month at the law firm, back when I was still learning how billing cycles and trust accounts worked, and I remember configuring it carefully, timing it 3 days before each semester's deadline based on the academic calendar Camila had sent me, a small, unglamorous act of logistics that became so routine I genuinely stopped thinking about it most months. I didn't do it as a secret, exactly. I did it the way you do something you've simply decided matters, without needing anyone to watch you decide it. There were 2 semesters where my own finances got tight. Once when my car needed a transmission replacement I hadn't budgeted for, and I remember briefly considering pausing the transfer for a month before deciding instead to put the repair on a credit card and let the tuition payment go through on schedule anyway, a choice that felt obvious in the moment and that I never mentioned to anyone, including Anthony, who I'm fairly certain would have offered to cover more if he'd known. I visited Camila on campus twice a year, usually during her exam weeks, mostly just to drop off groceries and sit with her in her dorm's common room while she studied, which never felt connected to the tuition payments in my head at the time, just something separate I did because I missed her. Looking back, I think those visits and the automatic transfer came from the same place, a kind of steady, unspoken form of showing up that didn't need to be announced to count as real. Camila mentioned once, during one of those visits, that Anthony had called her the week before to talk through a stressful balance notice the school had sent, walking her calmly through what it meant and reassuring her he'd handle it. A conversation she said meant a lot to her in the moment, and one I was glad he'd had with her even though, unbeknownst to either of them, my transfer had already cleared that same balance 3 days earlier. I want to be fair to Anthony in this story because I don't think his toast came from any deliberate intention to erase what I'd done. I think over 4 years of being the one who checked in with Camila about deadlines and scholarship renewals, the visible conversational side of the financial support, he genuinely lost track of the fact that consistency and visibility aren't the same thing, and that a quiet automatic transfer can matter just as much as a stressed, generous check written in the moment a balance notice arrives. Anthony has always been the kind of person who shows love loudly, through gestures people can see and remember. The surprise pickup from the airport, the emotional phone call at exactly the right moment, the toast at a graduation reception. That instinct isn't a flaw, and it genuinely served Camila well over the years, especially during her first semester. When she called him in tears about failing an exam, and he drove 2 hours that same night just to sit with her in a campus dining hall until she felt steady enough to keep going. I couldn't have offered her that particular kind of support, not in the same way. And I don't think the story of those 4 years is honest if it doesn't include what he actually gave her that I didn't. The reception continued, more subdued from Anthony for the rest of the afternoon, though Camila, to her credit, seemed mostly entertained by the whole exchange rather than upset by it, telling a small cluster of cousins later that her brothers had apparently been in a secret tuition-paying competition neither of them knew they were in. Anthony found me near the parking lot afterward and apologized properly, admitting he genuinely believed, without ever checking, that his contributions were the ones keeping Camila enrolled, a belief that had let him narrate the last 4 years in a way that simply wasn't accurate. Camila started her first job 2 months ago, a position with a nonprofit focused on first-generation college access, work she's told me repeatedly she wouldn't have been positioned for without the scholarship renewal that consistent, gap-free payment history helped protect. She doesn't spend much time thinking about which brother paid what, and I don't think she should have to. That was never really her burden to sort out. Our mother, for her part, told me a few weeks after the reception that she'd known about my transfer the entire time, since I told her directly the week I set it up, but that she never corrected Anthony's version of events either, partly out of not wanting to referee her adult son's contributions against each other, and partly, she admitted, because she'd assumed we'd eventually compare notes on our own. I understood that reasoning, even as I gently pointed out that 4 years is a long time for two brothers to go without comparing notes on something that mattered this much. Anthony and I talk more directly about money now than we ever did before that reception, a change neither of us expected, but both of us seem glad for. He's told me more than once since that he'd never actually looked at what a semester cost against what he was personally sending, an accounting he'd simply never done because the story he was telling himself didn't require the math to hold up. We've started splitting things more deliberately since. A small fund we both contribute to for Camila's eventual move to a new apartment once her nonprofit job stabilizes, this time with an actual shared spreadsheet neither of us has to discover secondhand from a stranger holding a folder. Here's what I actually learned standing in that lobby and listening to a financial aid officer's routine congratulations do more to set the record straight than 4 years of quiet automatic transfers ever could on their own. Consistency doesn't announce itself the way a generous toast does. People can tell a story about who carried a burden as confidently as they like, cup raised, room full of relatives listening. They can't argue with 48 months of on-time payments logged under your own name in a system built specifically to track exactly that. If this hit close to home, tell me in the comments about a time your quiet consistency got overshadowed by someone else's louder generosity, and let me know which brother you'd have believed first if you'd been standing in that lobby. Subscribe if you want to see how these stories keep unfolding. Share it with someone who's ever kept a promise nobody was watching them keep, and I'll see you in the next one.